Okay, class, so the second problem I want to talk to you about in Chapter 8, and remember Chapter 8 has to do with these short-term business decisions, and this problem is a make or buy short-term decision. And that's just another way of saying outsourcing. In other words, should we make our product in-house or should we outsource it where it's economically or it's cheaper to have somebody else make this particular item for us? So we'll just take a look. I'll put up the data for the information. It says TEKsystems manufactures an optical switch that uses in its final product. TEKsystems incurred the following manufacturing costs when it produced 68,000 units last year. So here's the cost for 68,000. TEKsystems does not yet know how many switches it will need this year. However, another company has offered to sell TEKsystems the switch for $13 per unit. If TEKsystems buys the switch from the outside supplier, the manufacturing facilities will be idle, cannot be used for any other purposes, yet none of the fixed costs are avoidable. So the key to these problems, especially this one, is looking to see what are the relevant costs. Okay, variable costs are always relevant, and any fixed costs that you can avoid, those are also relevant costs. So in making the decisions, we're looking for the relevant costs. All right, so requirement one says, given the same cost structure, should they buy or make the switch? And it wants you to give an incremental analysis on a per unit basis. It also says enter 0 for any zero amounts, round amounts to the nearest cent, use the minus sign, okay, when it's appropriate. Okay, so taking a look then, we'll figure out how much it is on a per unit basis. First of all, we have direct materials, direct labor, variable manufacturing overhead. Those are relevant costs because they are variable costs. Because we cannot avoid any of the fixed costs in requirement one, it is not a relevant cost. Okay, so $6 or $612,000 divided by the 68,000 units that we made means that we have $9, and it says to put in by cents, so I'm going to have to go ahead and do that. Direct labor, let's see, it's 136,000. Oops, too many zeros. 136,000. Divide that by 68,000. You can see that's an easy little math problem. You could probably do it in your head. So you have $2 per unit for direct labor. Variable overhead, that's easy. 68,000 divided by 68,000. Purchase price is 0. I'll put in zeros here. Hopefully I don't need cents for that. And then, of course, if I purchase it, it's $13.50. Adding up all of these total variable costs, $12. The total cost to make the product is greater than $12, but we can't avoid any of the fixed costs, so only the variable costs are relevant. Okay, the difference between these costs, $9 here. You can see this is simple enough, $2, $1, and this is a negative 1350. This is what they were talking about as far as using negative sign or parentheses. And so it comes out that if we buy the product instead of making the product, it would actually be costing us $1.50 per unit. Okay, so at this point we would say, no, we're not going to buy it, we are going to make it. Okay, so the decision is to make the optical switch, and because the variable cost per unit to make the switch is less, or I should say, yeah, it's less than the variable cost per unit to buy the switch. Okay, so let's see. Okay, now the second part, we're going to change it up a little bit. This time, now assume that TEKsystems can avoid $97,000 of fixed costs. That's what they mean by avoidable fixed cost. So now the fixed costs become relevant to the decision making. And they're going to need 73,000 switches. Now what should they do? They want us to complete this table here. So just give me a minute. Okay, so what I did was I just put in the titles here because I want to show you where this information comes from. So we're going to take the variable cost per unit. We're now going to multiply it by the number of units we need, which is 73,000. So we have our total variable cost. And then we're going to put in the fixed cost if we make the switches and the fixed cost if we buy the switches. So this will give us our total relevant cost. Okay, to begin with, this is still $12 to make it as far as the variable costs. And of course, this is $13.50. We're going to have 73,000 of these switches. That's the total number that we're going to need. So this total amount is $876,000. Again, you can use your calculator and double check these. 985,500. And now for the fixed cost. If we make them, you can see our fixed costs are $408,000. If we instead of making it, if we buy them, it will be $408,000. And this is really the only little tricky part to this, minus the $97,000 we don't have to pay or we will be able to avoid. And so this amount then is $311,000. Our total relevant costs now are $1,284,000 if we make the switch. If we buy the switch, it's $1,296,500. And so the decision is still that we are going to make the switch rather than buy the switch. Not by much, but it still is the switch. So the decision is to make the optical switch because the total relevant cost to make the switches are less than the total relevant cost to buy the switch. Now, there's one last part to this, and it's a little bit tricky, but I'm going to show you how to do it. It says, given the last scenario, what is the most that TEKsystems would be willing to pay to outsource the switches? Begin by identifying the basic formula that is used to determine the indifference. So the cost of making the switches is going to be both the variable costs plus the fixed costs, compared to the variable cost plus the fixed costs. Okay, so that would mean that instead of the old way where it used to be when revenues equal expenses, now it's the variable and fixed costs. So that's the formula. So now using this basic formula, how would you make this indifferent? In other words, how much would you be willing to buy it for so that it would cost the same amount to make the switch as it does to buy the switch? Okay, so this is a little bit hard to show you on this tape. I've thought about this several ways, but what it's basically going to do is take the total amount that it is to make it. So I have $1,284,000. Now the fixed cost, if I buy it, is going to be a total of $311,000. So the variable cost can be $973,000, and that's going to be for 73,000 of these switches. Okay, so the closest I can come to showing you how to do this is by simply matching up this 1,284,000 equal to 311,000 plus 73,000x. So that comes down to this amount. And so the cost per switch would be $13. It says to the round to the nearest cent. And they would be willing to outsource the cost if it's equal to $13.33. Or I guess the better answer is if it's less than this. Checking my answer. Okay, so we got through all three parts of this problem, and good luck until we talk again.